resisted heroin because heroin had this sort of mystique about it. And perhaps ice has that same sort of mystique because of the media angle on these particular drugs, because we only see certain people and identify certain people as users of these drugs. Heroin, we only see the visible users, the street worker standing on some hill at a corner at 2 a.m. in the morning in their underwear, or the homeless user. You can see increasingly in Melbourne asking for money. Nobody sees people like me who live in a private house and meet their deal at the store and come back and use at home. So I avoided it for a while, but once one of my circle of friends used, it was sort of, he didn't disintegrate and die. It wasn't like a vampire being exposed to sunlight. So I tried it, and it was just everything that I was looking for. And I talked to somebody who had seen psychologists since like grade 4 for mental health issues. And I'm not here to go into those, but drugs just make me feel good. And this is an association between one and the other. I'm not the one to make that association. But they felt good. And if I used heroin today, it would still feel good. It would still feel good. So why did I take drugs? I took drugs because they felt good. And they made me function in a better way than I was able to. When I was writing my PhD, one of the most productive days was when I was using. When I used, I could concentrate. I could do what I had to do. Whereas other days my mind would wander. I guess just to set the context, I've been an injecting drug user since 18. I'm 44, so I got me in maximum 10, never went back.
Most people who use drugs, contrary to the common wisdom, are using it for pleasure and keeping it within limits and not being damaged by it and not damaging others by it. 70% of people who use ice, which James referred to, use it less than once a month in Australia. That's not the picture you get from the media, where everyone's this kind of demon villain about to clock you on the head.
As I said before, if I used heroin now, I'd enjoy it a great deal. What I didn't say is this. I take drugs because they make me feel good, but when the drugs wear off, I want to take more because I feel shit in between that feeling good. And that's a very important point. The more you take, the more you need. And you understand the pharmacology of that in terms of the tolerance levels going up. The more you take, the more dangerous the situation. I've overdosed 3 times, to the point of requiring paramedics to come out and inject me with naloxone. And the 3rd time I overdosed and required paramedics to come and save my life, that was the time I tried to seek some help beyond talking to counsellors, which tells you something about how attractive drugs can be. You nearly kill yourself twice and don't stop. How dependent you can get on drugs after a while. And I'll come back to why that dependence came about. And it's about crossing a line from using drugs for pleasure to using them as self-medication. My first marriage broke down, and we had a 1.5-year-old daughter. We still have a daughter, she's 11 now. And I just found the separation from this little girl that I loved so much. Waking up in the next room to her, to then waking up in a spare room in this hole of a house was just horrific. And I didn't just abuse heroin, I abused alcohol. Different people like different drugs, as Alex says. I can't use cannabis. Cannabis I hate. I loathe it. There's certain people who hate alcohol. Why do we have to let that's another argument. Actually, we should have another choice of recreational drugs for those people. So I started taking them to medicate the psychological pain of being separated from family. Using drugs, I wasn't enjoying them anymore. It was getting me through life. And it's easy to say in retrospect, but I believe, I probably would have knocked myself off if I didn't have that to get me through. That's what I believe. So I still enjoy the feeling, but once I cross that line from using them for fun and using heroin maybe once a fortnight, once a month, once I crossed that line and started medicating, the I woke up the next day, felt shit again. I know what can make you start feeling shit. Woke up the next, and on, and it becomes dependent. And the psychological dependence for me was probably more so. Whereas I can look back and say, no, I wouldn't. I think, that notion that you made the choice, you made the decision to stick the needle in your own. I guess for me, there is an element of truth in that. But for people, that majority of people who become the most problematic and chaotic of drug users, you need to put, it requires an exercise in empathy, and it's something we're really lacking in today's world. You can't have any justice unless you have empathy. And you need to be able to place yourself in somebody else's shoes. If you're growing up in poverty, if you're abused by your family, if you have no opportunities for education, if you have no employment opportunities, if there is nothing. I mean, do we really think Indigenous people in certain communities live on average 20 years less because they want to, they choose to live that lifestyle, or is it because the only thing to get them through the daily horror of that lifestyle is drugs? Then I don't think, for me a choice is having the ability to choose between two viable options. And if the viable options are suicide or drugs to get out of the hell of your life, then I don't think you're making a choice. So maybe yes, I do think I made a choice and it was a wrong choice. There were lots of influences going on. There are lots of things that may mitigate that and make me feel less guilty about it. I mean, I don't feel guilty. I don't judge myself. I feel guilty about the things I've done to other people in terms of family and the horror I put them through. But in terms of saying all drug users have a choice, thank you for allowing me that said, right? That was good. Yeah, don't even judge people.
The social part is also important because whilst it's wonderful to have a PhD academic working full-time, looking after a family and children, who can speak to you intelligently, articulately, well-educated, etc., James is not the norm, not the usual card-carrying heroin user. And most people who develop serious problems with heroin or serious problems with other illicit drugs are socially and economically disadvantaged. And that's very important to realise. And in a country like Australia, which is quite unequal, most of the rich countries have become much more unequal, the United States especially. But Australia has also, since about the 1970s, if you have a lot of poverty, you'll have very severe illicit drug problems. So somehow we have to manage this in a better way. I've just been in Germany last month, and we were in Frankfurt, and heard the story there of how Frankfurt cleaned up its drug problem. Frankfurt had in the central business district of the city that is the most important business city in the country with the biggest economy in Europe, Frankfurt used to have 1,500 people taking part in an open drug scene. An open drug scene is where people buy, sell and use drugs out in the open. And they used to use those drugs right smack bang, no pun intended, in the middle of the business area. Berlin Wall collapses November '89, and the European Union says to Germany, we want to shift the European Central Bank to Frankfurt, but we're not going to do it while you've got this open drug scene. The banks and the businesses say to Frankfurt City Council, listen, why don't we all get together and sort all this out? So guess what? They do sort it out. And they sort it out in a way which is very compassionate, very effective, very sensible, and very cost effective. So I went out to a centre 7 kilometres from the central business district. They run a shuttle bus, believe it or not, between the drug using area and this place 7 kilometres away. And there people can get, drug users can get help. They can use drugs under supervision so that they're not going to collapse in their mother's bedroom. And they can, if they collapse in this centre, nurses and so on will resuscitate them and revive them. They can get cheap, nutritious food, they can watch television, they can play billiards, they can read books, and they can also get training. They learn how to fix old wardrobes and chests and drawers and tables and chairs. They learn how to fix garden benches around Frankfurt. And this is a growing movement we're seeing in Europe to try and reintegrate socially and economically disadvantaged drug users, not the PhD academic types, they'll generally look after themselves, but the guys, men and women, who are really struggling, often with severe physical illness, severe mental illness. And this is where the drug consumption groups like King's Cross NSIC come in, because they attract people who are from that group. So how do we deal with these people? We have to change the way we learn from Europe. We have to have a much more health social focus rather than doing the minimum that we can get away with in this law enforcement environment we operate in.